Good morning and welcome to the Orlando Real Estate Buzz. I'm Brendan Rendo of the Homes in Orlando team. Unfortunately, Joe is traveling this week and has been stuck with several layovers, so he won't be able to join us. But we're going to go ahead and go through all the news. Number of things happening this week. A lot of numbers being released. The biggest one, of course, being the Fed coming out yesterday saying that they're going to hold the rates again for longer. So we have that. Then we have some job numbers news this morning. We have PPI coming in this morning. And then a report that no one has made any big news about, but being in the real estate industry and being all about real estate, it's a report that we've got to go over, and that is the National Home Survey that came out this week from Fannie Mae with some very, very surprising news. So let's get into it and let's go through what happened. The Fed came out yesterday. Jerome Powell, very hawkish still about cutting rates, said basically we could possibly have maybe one before the end of the year. So I'd kind of agree with him on that with some of the numbers. But when we get into numbers that are dropped this morning, something stood out, and we're starting to see where we're seeing more weakness in the economy. This was the unemployment number that came out earlier this morning. And we had initial claims jumped to 242,000. That was an increase of 13,000. And that is actually the biggest increase since August of last year. And Powell made a couple comments yesterday about the job numbers that he basically, in a lot of ways said the numbers that have been coming out are a bunch of bullshit, plain and simple. That the discrepancy between the government numbers and the ADP numbers, there's just too much of a spread, and that the job market is softer than what the numbers are really showing us at this time. So we see that the initial claims have increased, as well as the number of total unemployed has increased about 1,820,000. So that number has increased to about 30,000, up about 30,000. So the unemployment number last week, of course, went up. We're about 4% right now. And then we see this continuing softening overall. And then also this morning, we got the PPI number, which is the Producer's Price Index, which kind of tells you where inflation, consumer price inflation, is going to be for the near future. And PPI actually took a little bit of a hit as well. So the producers aren't increasing their pricing as much. Then you've got the jobs numbers, claims increased to the highest level since August of 2023. So that to me shows a continued softening in the overall economy. And that may be the one thing that may push the Fed to cut earlier this year than later. If we continue to see that softening, because remember, he said there's two things that we're looking at. Number one, of course, is inflation. I mean, the market went nuts because the expectation was 3.4% yesterday, and it came in at 3.3, a tenth of a percent lower. Not a big deal. Not really a big deal. But when you look at what it did to the overall bond market, this was really kind of amazing, because you see right here, this was the release of the CPI numbers yesterday. And you see the dive that it took. And we've pretty much held most of the gains that we saw yesterday. A little rebound, maybe about a third of the rate increase of the benefit that we've got, but it hasn't jumped back totally. And then this morning we got a little bit even better. So we're sitting pretty close to the total gains of yesterday. So if you're looking to shop this weekend, it may be a great weekend to go and take a look at a home simply because your interest rates are going to be a little bit better overall. So that's good news on the rate front for home buyers. But looking at where people actually think the Fed are going to go, this is interesting because we were sitting well into the 90s here for the July Fed meeting. And we have jumped up a little bit to about 10.3. I don't think it's going to be July. I just don't think there's enough. Powell was extremely hawkish yesterday, extremely hawkish. And he came flat out and said, maybe, not definitely, but maybe one rate cut this year, all depending on the numbers. So he's really stepping away from where we see the EU and Canada, which really economically are much softer economies than we currently have. So you look at that, then we jump in, and this is where we're starting to see the real shift, and that's in September. A lot of people are looking at September right now and, thinking roughly about 60% of people believe that that's when we're going to get our first rate cut. That's when they're going to do a quarter point rate cut. Yeah, about 6.4 saying that maybe a half a point. No, they're not going to cut half a point unless the economy is really, really in doldrums. Otherwise, no, they're not going to cut half a point. They may cut a quarter, but it really all depends on the continuation until I think they see an actual CPI number break below the 3% for a couple months. I don't see them cutting rates. I don't. I think they're going to also feel comfortable with even possibly seeing unemployment spike up to about 4.5%. I think that's kind of the number they're looking at where they're saying, okay, jobs numbers are where we want them, but the inflation isn't. Because remember, if unemployment increases, that pressure on wages is going to continue to decrease. So I think that's really where they're kind of sitting overall on the market. And then the big news that really nobody touched on this week, I haven't seen anyone address it. No one come in and say, wow, that's absolutely amazing, is our national housing survey that came in. And for sellers, this is not good news at all. Currently, 86% of people feel that it's a bad time to buy a home. That is a record. Why? Unaffordability. What have we discussed all year is the unaffordability of homes. Prices staying pretty steady, seeing some slight increases. Orlando, you've seen more price cuts than you have in quite a while. That percentage of homes doing price decreases has gone up tremendously. But they're citing right now that only 14% of consumers indicate that it's a good time to buy a home. And that's down from 20% last month. So sellers have to look at this and realize that their pool of buyers is continuing to shrink. Even with the rate decreases that we're going to be getting with the 10-year T dropping, it's not enough to make homes affordable. And where are you seeing that? You're seeing that with the builders. The builders are cutting their prices as well as doing more and more incentives. That's why the building, the new sales numbers are holding pretty steady. It's because if you're looking at a home, a lot of the incentives that the home builders are providing is the only way that you can actually walk in and afford a home. If they're willing to buy down, your fixed rate 30-year mortgage, a percentage, so you're going from 6 or 7 to 6%, some cases even 5.5%, that makes a world of difference for a family and someone purchasing a home. I mean, we look at the numbers last week here in Orlando, where the average price is 372, but the average family can only qualify for 336. That gap of approximately 10% is a large gap, and it has to either be compensated through price cuts or through rate cuts. And the Fed said, we're not going to get those rate cuts right now. Just not going to happen. So you're going to see that 10-year treasury really kind of sit in a pattern, probably between 4.2 to 4.5, depending on different reports that come out in the economy. So you look at that, and then you look at what's going on overall in Florida. And this article that we going into from Globe Street is showing that Florida right now has the fastest cooling market, specifically West Florida. What areas are this? Well, in Newport, which was the hottest market a year ago, the prices were going insane. You got Northport, you got Tampa, and you got Cape Coral, which were all three of the hottest housing markets in the nation for the past 3 years, are now are cooling the fastest of any market. Then the other market in the top 10 from Florida is Orlando. And you're seeing that with the number of the continued inventory increase, less sales happening overall, and continued price reductions. Right now, Northport, their supply of homes is up 68% year over year. More homes on the market, less pressure for the price increases, as well as more pressure for price cuts. And right now, 42.6 of the sellers have dropped their asking price. That's up from 36% a year earlier. And in Cape Coral, they've jumped to 37.5% are dropping prices, up from 32%. So you're seeing that continued softening in the market. But what's the interesting thing is, while all this pricing pressure to cut prices is going on, Florida is building more new homes than any other state in the country. We're still building more homes than any place. And you've seen several announcements through, for instance, the Orlando Business Journal. National developer just bought a bunch of land up in Lake County. They just bought land over here in Volusia County. So they still feel the market, it's a solid market, but I'm not sure it's as strong as everyone believes. Orlando Business Journal actually has a series of articles out right now that we're going to be addressing, which is that Central Florida needs more homes than ever before. But we may need more homes, but what we really need are more affordable homes. These builders who are building these homes and are pricing, even between $400,000 and $500,000. When you look at the median income of every county around, you've knocked out 95% of the people who live within the counties. They just can't afford it. The income has not increased enough. So even though they're building, I think you're going to see continued pressure on the builders to offer incentives, at least for the next year or two, and continue to really evaluate their pricing. And for instance, this morning, I got another email from Taylor Morrison, and had 14 of their quick move-in homes, all with price reductions. So they've got to keep building, keep the revenue coming in, but they've also, I think, have to reevaluate how they're pricing them, the sizes of the homes that they're building as well, to make them more affordable for the people and the incomes that are currently here in the Orlando market. And with that, we're also seeing an increase of build for rent housing. We have the largest number of build for rent than we've ever had in the country's history. And there's several of them, again, here in the Orlando market, because they can build the houses and rent them for $3,000, $3,500. And instead of selling them and giving someone a mortgage for $4,000 or $4,500, it's become much less expensive currently to rent than it is to own. And we're seeing that in the numbers we just looked at with the National Housing Survey, where only 14% of people feel that it's actually a good time to buy a home. That absolutely amazes me, because that has always been part to me of the American dream, is home ownership, owning your own home. So those are the things that are going on currently with the real estate and economy. And then let's hop into our numbers for Orlando. And this week, we actually took a huge drop. We spiked last week with 530 sales. Then we've dropped back to 441, which was more in the median line of where sales had been. And we continue to increase inventory. We're now up well over 6,000, 6,602 homes on the market currently in the Orlando market. Then you see with the condos are they're flat. And I actually saw a news report yesterday about a condo association, because of the new laws, hitting a local condo here in Orlando with a $22,000 assessment per condo. And people just don't have it. So I think you're going to see people continue to try and get out of their condos. It's going to be actually cheaper for them to rent than it is to own the condos. And then you see here, our inventory increased again by 84. And we've got well over 3,000 condos in the market right now. Then we hop into the actual numbers and our months of inventory. This is actually increased this week compared to last week. Last week, because of the high number of sales, we actually dipped just below 3 months of inventory. This week, we're back up to about 3.5. And then look again at the over 1 million. We are almost to 8 months worth of inventory on the 1 million and above homes. And then we see our original list to sales price sitting about 95, just below that 95 percentile. And then final list to sales, a little over 97. This I think is tightening because we're seeing more price cuts per home than we have in the past. It's not just a single price cut and the house sells. It may take 2 or 3 price cuts before that house is priced where people feel comfortable with purchasing it. And then where the real meat of the market is currently is that 300 to 400,000 market. And you'll see that's where we're seeing the least amount of move on as far as original list price. But again, back up here to over 1 million. You're seeing nearly an 11% cut from the original list price to the final. Hop into our graphs. You see weekly sales. We had a couple quick spikes. I expect this possibly to jump over the next couple weeks with the rate. We should see probably about a 1/4 point rate benefit from the recent adjustments in the 10-year T. So I expect this to hop up a little bit in the coming weeks. People are able to lock in today, Monday, go out and do their shopping over the next 30 days. This should help spike this number of sales a little bit. And then we see our active inventory, and it is straight line up, straight line. So we have increased our housing inventory, single family homes, by nearly just over 21% since the beginning of the year. Then we hop into the condos, and this is what we're looking at. Months of inventory for the condos. We're sitting at 7.02. What is old school buyer's market? 6 months. If we've got 6 months of inventory, old school thinking was you now have a buyer's market. Interesting, we put in an offer on a couple of condos. They were priced at 205, but the most recent sale was 185,000, and it just killed me because one of the responses, oh, the seller's waiting for an offer closer to what she's priced it at. And you're sitting there thinking to yourself, well, what happens if you do an appraisal? You're going to get crushed because it's a 2-2. This is a 2-2. Everything else is a 2-2. Exact same size. Yeah, your kitchen's a little bit nicer, but nothing major. So maybe $1,000 here, a couple $1,000 there. How do you justify your price? You can't. You cannot justify a $20,000 price gap, especially in a market that's literally a declining market at this time. Condos are a declining market. They are not increasing. They are actually decreasing in price. Then we see our sales numbers, and here you go. Look at the condo sales, just dropping, because people, when you are working with the condo market, you've got to check everything now. You've got to make sure, just like that one, is there a special assessment coming? If there is, okay, how much is it? How long is it? And is it worth me buying it? We walked away from even looking at one the other day because the HOA fee was $404 a month. And then there was a new special assessment for the next 3 years for $189,000. So basically, we've got a $600 payment on top of the mortgage payment just to live there. Makes no sense. And you see where a couple of the units have dropped from about $175,000 to $140,000. And people still don't want it. But that's because so many of these condos deferred so much maintenance for so long, and you cannot do it any longer. But it's unfortunate in that for the homeowners of these condos, they didn't know, and I think it's a definite liability for the condos, and I kind of think you may see some class action lawsuits against the associations for mismanagement. I think it's more than reasonable. You left us exposed to repairs, which you're supposed to maintain, and now you're going to tell me I need to come in with $22,000. No, I wouldn't be happy with that one either. And then again, inventory for the condos, just a continuous straight line, and we're up over 30% for the year with available condos on the market. So that's where our Orlando real estate market is sitting today. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out. Always available. Please like, subscribe, and join us every Thursday for the Orlando Real Estate Buzz. We enjoy having you. Take care.